when you're driving on the road, I typically, keep it smooth, gradual, accelerate when I need to, but my car's not powerful enough to ever spin out or have the problem with spinning out with too much throttle application. So how does that change, or how do you approach throttle application when you hit the track for the first time?
So it's crucial that everything's super smooth, super gradual. You got to almost imagine that everything's working kind of in synchronization. So as you apply the throttle, you open up the steering lock in the same way that as you hit the brakes, you want to be steering straight, but as you turn in, you release the brake. So everything's working in sync. So we're now shifting away from the braking technique onto the throttle technique, but it's still the same idea that if you hit the throttle with loads of steering lock on, you're either going to understeer and just go nowhere, just go straight on, or you're going to oversteer and spin. So yeah, the big thing is just smoothness. You've got to imagine it as a gradual input, which can be a little bit different from from coming from your road car, but we've just got to have a lot more sympathy with the car and a lot more more of a feel of what the car's doing, basically. So that there is a perfect example of getting on the throttle too soon. So because it wasn't super low speed of a corner, it meant that when you got to throttle, all the weight shifted off the front, so the front lifted up, all the weight is now on the rear wheels, and because we had kind of fairly low tyre temperatures anyway, you've spun up those rear wheels and the car's carried on going the direction that you were going, which was right. So that was a perfect example of getting on the throttle too soon. And sometimes, if your tyres are warmer, and depending on how the car's set up in the real thing, sometimes you'll get understeer where the front tyres are sliding and you're just going straight on. But yeah, that was a perfect example of getting kind of what we would say is too greedy on the throttle. So that was a perfect example of the kind of the understeer when you're on throttle. You got back to throttle really early before we've even got to the apex, which again is a very common trait where people brake a little bit too early. So to overcompensate, they get back on throttle again, they apply loads of steering lock and it understeers. And so you can see, as soon as you got back to throttle, you saw the front actually lifted up again. You've still got all that steering lock on, you're still trying to get around that corner, but there's no weight on the front, so there's nothing the car can do. So it just understeers, and what we say, it scrubs, basically. The front tyres are scrubbing over the surface, they're not gripping onto the surface and kind of actually doing any turning. So that was a perfect example of the effects of getting on the throttle too early, too aggressively, before we've even rotated the car fully. And it just shows that the throttle is a great way to manipulate the way the car kind of handles. So on the corner exit, you can get it to slide a little bit. You can induce a bit of oversteer, to kind of get the car to rotate. But in the same way, you can if you want that reassurance of a little bit of understeer, you can set the car up in a more understeery way and use that throttle to kind of just ride on that limit of kind of slip on the front tyres, essentially. Yeah, this is like a perfect example of the kind of differences in throttle technique. So you see on the white lap, you've got back to throttle really soon. You've kind of realised at this point, oh, it's too soon. I've probably understeering or oversteering at that point. So you've come back off the throttle again. At this point, you're just losing momentum. It's killing time in a sense, and it's inducing understeer and oversteer, kind of traits that we don't want to see on a corner exit. And then you've gradually gone back to throttle again. At this point on the faster lap, you're doing the perfect kind of linear gradual input, but almost like the damage is done by this point. So on the slower lap, when you could be fully back to throttle, the car's probably offline, it's probably not rotated as much or too much. So you've had to come back out of throttle again, and that just really, really hurts you. On kind of corner exit, at this point, you're about 21 kilometers an hour up on the slower lap versus the faster lap, so actually you're up on yourself. By the time you get to this point, you can just see you're just losing speed all the way down the straight. You're just losing time against yourself, and overall that basically costs you 8.5 tenths in one straight. It's like basically almost a second that you've lost just from throttle input. But if you can gain half a kilometre an hour on the exit, you're going to carry that all the way down the straight, and if you do that round a lap, say it's 100th for every corner, and there's, you know, 10 corners in a lap, that's a 10th. And, you know, in racing, a 10th can be the difference between first and fifth sometimes in certain championships. So
Thank you for watching. If you want to book your own session in SimTrack, follow the link in the description below.